The auctioneer called her worthless. Until he paid everything, he had the morning sun burned like a brand across Clara Whitmore's face as she stood on the auction block, her hands bound behind her back with rough hemp rope. The auctioneer's voice cut through the desert air like a whip crack, each word driving deeper into her chest than the last. "What am I bid for this here woman? Strong back, can cook, clean mend. Though I'll be honest, gents, she's got a mouth on her and a stubborn streak wider than the Rio Grande." The crowd of men below laughed, their faces cruel in the morning light. "Start the bidding at $50. 50 for damaged goods." Clara's jaw tightened. Damaged goods. The word stung worse than the rope cutting into her wrists. 3 months ago she'd been Clara Whitmore, daughter of respected rancher Samuel Whitmore, owner of 2,000 acres of prime grazing land. Then the drought came. Then the cattle died. Then her father put a gun to his head, rather than face the shame of bankruptcy. The debts fell to her like stones in a landslide. $40, called a voice from the back. Clara couldn't see the speaker through the crowd of unwashed men pressing closer to the platform. Sweat and tobacco smoke filled her nostrils. 40 I'm bid. Do I hear 50? The auctioneer's gavel hung in the air like an executioner's axe. Come now, boys. Look at those hands. She can work, and she's young enough to bear children if that's your inclination. Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. She stared straight ahead at the weathered boards of the general store, refusing to meet the eyes of the men who studied her like livestock. The morning wind carried dust from the street, coating her lips with grit. 45, came another voice, this one closer. Clara caught sight of the speaker, a heavy-set man with tobacco stains in his beard and hands that looked like they'd never known soap. "I'll take her for 45, he said louder, stepping forward. "Got me a farm needs tending and no woman to tend it. She'll do fine once I break that spirit of hers." The crowd murmured approval. Clara's stomach turned. 3 months ago this man wouldn't have dared look at her sideways. Now he spoke of breaking her like she was a wild horse. 45 I'm bid. Going once. $500. The voice came from the edge of the crowd, quiet but carrying like thunder across water. Every head turned. The auctioneer's gavel froze halfway to his palm. Clara's eyes found the speaker, and her breath caught. He was tall, lean, with dark hair touched gray at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. His clothes were clean but worn, a working man's clothes, not a gentleman's. But there was something in the way he stood, the way he looked at her, without the hunger she saw in the other faces, that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "Did you say 500, mister?" The auctioneer's voice cracked like a boy's. "I did." The stranger stepped forward, his boots quiet on the packed dirt. $500. Cash. The crowd stirred like wasps in a kick nest. $500 was more money than most of these men saw in a year. More than Clara's father had owed when he pulled that trigger. "Well now," the auctioneer stammered. That's a generous bid, sir. Very generous indeed. But are you certain? 500 for Miss Whitmore." The stranger's eyes never left Clara's face. "Her name is Clara Whitmore. Not damaged goods. Not livestock. Clara Whitmore." Something broke open in Clara's chest at hearing her name, spoken with such care. No one had called her Miss Whitmore since the funeral, since the day they nailed her father's coffin shut and told her the debts were hers to bear. 500 going once. The auctioneer's voice was barely a whisper. Going twice. His eyes swept the crowd, hoping for another bid that would never come. Sold to the gentleman for $500. The stranger pulled a roll of bills from his coat and counted them out with steady hands. Clara watched his face, searching for some clue to his intentions. Was he kind or cruel? Savior or just another kind of captor? His expression gave nothing away. The rope fell from her wrists as the auctioneer cut her bonds. Blood rushed back into her fingers like needles of fire. The stranger approached the platform, his hand extended to help her down. "Ma'am," he said simply. Clara hesitated. Behind her lay the ruins of everything she'd known. Ahead waited the unknown, bought and paid for with 500 silver dollars. She took his hand. His grip was calloused but gentle, steady as granite. As her feet touched the ground, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "My name is Thomas Harding," he said, "and you're free to go wherever you please, Miss Whitmore. The money bought your debts, not you." The words hit her like cold water. Free. When was the last time she'd been free? But as they walked away from the auction block, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that freedom bought with another man's fortune came with its own kind of chains. Clara's boots stirred dust clouds with each step as she walked beside Thomas Harding through the main street of Bitter Creek. The town watched them pass, shopkeepers pausing in their doorways, women pulling their children closer, men spitting tobacco juice and shaking their heads. The whispers followed like coyotes tracking wounded prey. "There goes Samuel Whitmore's daughter with her new owner. $500 for that stubborn girl. Man must be desperate, or rich enough not to care about throwing money into a dry well." Thomas's jaw tightened with each cruel word, but his pace never changed. Clara kept her eyes forward, her chin raised despite the shame burning in her chest. She'd walked these streets as a respected rancher's daughter just months ago. Now she was gossip fodder and nothing more. They reached the edge of town, where a black gelding waited tied to a hitching post. Thomas untied the reins and turned to Clara, his storm-gray eyes unreadable in the afternoon light. "There's a stage that runs through here twice a week," he said quietly. "Denver, San Francisco, even back east if that's your inclination. I can buy you passage anywhere you want to go, Miss Whitmore. Start fresh where nobody knows your name." Clara stared at him. In all her imaginings of what would happen after the auction, this possibility had never entered her mind. Freedom. Real freedom. The chance to disappear into the vastness of America and never look back. But where would she go? What would she do? Her whole life had been the ranch, the cattle, the endless cycle of seasons on the high plains. She had no kin left alive, no friends who hadn't turned their backs when the money ran out. Why? The word came out harder than she'd intended. Why spend $500 on a stranger's freedom? Something flickered across Thomas's face. Pain, maybe, or an old regret. He looked away toward the distant mountains, their peaks sharp as broken glass against the blue sky. "Let's just say I know what it's like to stand where you're standing," he said, "and I know what it's like when nobody steps forward to help." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Clara studied his profile, the lines around his eyes that spoke of too much sun and too little sleep, the careful way he held himself, like a man ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice. "What if I don't want to run?" she asked. "What if I want to stay and fight for what's left of my father's name?" Thomas looked back at her, and for a moment she saw something raw in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or approval. "Then you're welcome at my ranch until you figure out how to do that," he said. "I could use the help anyway. Place has been going to ruin since." He stopped himself, the words hanging unfinished between them. "Since what?" "Since I stopped believing it was worth saving." The honesty in his voice caught Clara off guard. She'd expected platitudes, empty kindness, the sort of false comfort people offered when they wanted to feel better about themselves. This was different. This was truth, hard and unvarnished as the desert wind. A gunshot cracked from somewhere behind them. Both Clara and Thomas spun toward the sound, hands instinctively moving to weapons that weren't there. But it was just a cowboy firing into the air, probably celebrating a successful card game or drowning his sorrows in whiskey. The moment of shared tension broke something open between them. Clara saw the way Thomas had moved to shield her without thinking, the way his eyes had gone sharp and dangerous. This was a man who'd seen trouble before, maybe caused some of it himself. "Your ranch," she said carefully. "How far?" "Half-day's ride north. Up in the foothills where the water runs clean and the grass grows green. It's not much, but it's honest work and honest shelter." Clara looked back at Bitter Creek, at the buildings that had once felt like home and now felt like prison walls. Then she looked at Thomas Harding, this stranger who'd paid more money than she'd ever seen to buy her freedom, and then offered it freely. "I'll need my own room," she said, "and I'll work for my keep. I won't be beholden to any man, no matter how much money he spent." A smile tugged at the corner of Thomas's mouth, the first real expression she'd seen from him. "Wouldn't have it any other way, Miss Whitmore." As they rode toward the mountains with the setting sun painting the sky red as blood, Clara felt the weight of watching eyes fade behind them. Whatever lay ahead couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. The Harding Ranch appeared at sunset, like something from a half-remembered dream. Clara had expected a rundown homestead, maybe a cabin and a few scrub acres. Instead, she found herself looking at a two-story house with a wraparound porch, solid corrals, and pastures that stretched toward the mountains like green carpet. Water ran clear in a creek that cut through the property, and cottonwoods lined its banks like sentries. "It's beautiful," she breathed, sliding down from the gelding. Thomas dismounted beside her, his boots hitting the packed earth with a hollow sound. "Was my wife's pride," he said quietly. "She had a way with growing things. Made this place bloom like Eden." The past tense hit Clara like a physical blow. Was. She looked at Thomas's profile and saw the grief carved there, deep as canyon walls. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know you were widowed." 2 years now." He led the horse toward the barn, his voice steady but distant. "Fever took her in the winter, along with our son." Clara's chest tightened. She'd lost her father to shame and despair, but Thomas had lost everything that mattered. No wonder he understood her situation. No wonder he'd been willing to spend a fortune on a stranger's freedom. The house felt empty despite its size, clean but unlived in, like a church between services. Thomas showed her to a room on the second floor, simple but comfortable, with a window that looked out over the pastures. A woman's touch lingered in the curtains, the quilt on the bed, the small mirror on the dresser. This was hers, Clara said. It wasn't a question. She'd have liked you staying here. Thomas stood in the doorway, not crossing the threshold. Said this room was meant for daughters we never had. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Clara cooked and cleaned while Thomas tended the cattle and mended fences. They worked in comfortable silence during the day and sat on the porch in the evenings, watching stars emerge over the mountains. Thomas proved to be a gentle man with careful hands and a way of listening that made Clara feel heard for the first time since her father's death. But the weight of what he'd paid for her freedom pressed between them like a loaded gun. One evening, as coyotes yipped in the distance and firelight danced across the porch boards, Clara finally spoke the words that had been building in her chest like storm pressure. "I can't stay here forever, Thomas. People will talk." He looked up from the piece of leather he was mending, his needle pausing mid-stitch. "Let them talk. It's not that simple. You've got a reputation to protect, a business to run. Having me here." She struggled for words that wouldn't wound him. "It's not proper." Thomas set down his work and looked at her with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to her bones. "Clara," he said quietly, "I spent $500 to keep you from being sold to a man who wanted to break your spirit. Do you think I care what the good people of Bitter Creek say about propriety?" The gentleness in his voice made her chest ache. She'd grown to care for this broken, generous man more than was wise, more than was safe for either of them. "What if I stayed?" she whispered. "What if I stayed and it wasn't about the money or the debt or what people think? What if I stayed because I wanted to?" Thomas went very still. The leather fell from his hands. In the flickering firelight, Clara saw hope and fear warring in his expression. "Then I'd be the luckiest man in the territory," he said, "and the most terrified." Before Clara could ask what he meant, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the main road. Fast hoofbeats, riding hard in the darkness. Thomas was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the rifle propped beside his chair. 3 men on lathered horses pulled up in front of the porch. Even in the dim light, Clara recognized the leader, Marcus Webb, her father's former business partner and the man who'd held most of the family debts. The man who'd arranged for her to be sold at auction. "Evening, Harding," Webb called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Heard you made quite a purchase in town the other day." Thomas kept the rifle across his knees, his posture casual but ready. "Just helping a lady in distress, Webb. Nothing more." Webb's laughter was ugly in the darkness. $500 is a lot of help. Makes a man wonder what kind of return on investment you're expecting. "I'd watch my words if I were you," Thomas said, his voice quiet as death. "You're on my land now. Your land, your woman, your rules. I understand perfectly." Webb's voice carried a sneer that made Clara's skin crawl. "But there's something you don't understand, Harding. That girl you bought, her debts run deeper than you know." Thomas's knuckles went white around the rifle stock. "The debts were settled. I paid them in full." Webb's smile was a wolf's grin in the firelight. "You paid what the bank was owed, sure enough. But Samuel Whitmore borrowed, for more than just the bank. He borrowed from me, personal-like. Money for medicine when his wife was dying. Money to keep his ranch afloat when the cattle prices dropped. Money he swore on his daughter's life he'd pay back." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mother's final illness, the doctors from Denver, the expensive treatments that did nothing but drain hope and fortune. She remembered her father's haggard face, the way he'd disappear for hours and come back with cash and haunted eyes. "How much?" Thomas's voice was steady as stone. $2,000. Plus interest." Webb leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes glittering. "That girl's freedom will cost you $7,000, all told. Unless you'd rather I collect what's owed in other ways." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire. $7,000 was more money than most men saw in a lifetime. It was impossible. It was crushing. "And if I don't pay? Then Miss Whitmore comes back with us tonight. There's men in the mining camps who'll pay good money for a woman of her qualities. Enough to cover her daddy's debts, and then some." Clara's stomach turned to ice. The mining camps were hellholes where women disappeared and were never seen again. Places where life was cheaper than whiskey and twice as brief. Webb wheeled his horse around, his companions following suit. "You've got 3 days to come up with $7,000, plus another $500 for my patience. After that, the girl comes with us whether you like it or not." Their hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving Thomas alone on the porch with his rifle and his impossible choice. The morning of the third day dawned clear and cold, with frost painting the grass silver. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching Thomas harness the wagon, her coffee growing cold in her hands. He'd found a buyer, a cattle baron from Denver who'd pay $12,000 for the ranch, enough to settle Webb's demands and leave them with a stake for starting over. But Clara had made a decision during the long, sleepless night. She slipped out the back door and walked to the barn where Thomas was loading his saddlebags with the deed and papers. He looked up as she approached, and she saw the weight of the last 3 days carved into the lines around his eyes. "It's time," he said simply. "No." Clara's voice was steady despite the storm raging in her chest. "I won't let you do this." Thomas straightened, his hand pausing on the leather straps. "Clara, this ranch is your life. Your wife's memory. Your future." She stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "I won't be the reason you lose everything that matters. You matter more than buildings and pastures." "Do I?" Clara reached into her apron and pulled out a letter, sealed with wax. "Or am I just another woman you're trying to save because you couldn't save her?" The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He went pale, his hands falling to his sides. "That's not fair," he whispered. "Fair?" Clara's voice cracked. "Thomas, what happens after you pay Webb? What happens when we're both free but broke and homeless? Do we marry because you spent your fortune on my freedom? Do we pretend that love bought with sacrifice is the same as love freely given?" The sound of hoofbeats echoed from the main road. Webb, coming to collect his payment or his prize. Thomas looked toward the sound, then back at Clara, his face torn between duty and desire. "I won't let him take you. You won't have to." Clara pulled a small derringer from her apron pocket, her father's gun, the one he should have used on Webb instead of himself. I'd rather die free than live as anyone's property. Promise me something. She gripped his arm, her fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt. Promise me you'll keep the ranch. Keep her memory alive. Don't throw away everything good just to chase ghosts. The riders were closer now, their voices carrying on the morning air. Webb's laughter, cruel and confident. I promise, Thomas whispered. Clara kissed him, soft and brief as morning frost. When she pulled away, tears were streaming down both their faces. Because I'm going to do what my father should have done years ago, she said. I'm going to tell Webb the truth about his loans. Webb dismounted in front of the porch, his smile wide and predatory. Well, well. Right on time. You got my money, Harding. I've got something better, Clara said, stepping into view. I've got the truth about those loans you claim my father owed. Webb's smile faltered. What are you talking about, girl? Clara pulled a bundle of papers from her apron, documents she'd found hidden in her father's desk, papers she'd been too grief-stricken to examine until now. I'm talking about the fact that you were partners in a cattle-buying scheme that went bad. You lost the money gambling in Denver, then tried to make my father pay for your debts. She held up a promissory note in Webb's own handwriting. This says you owe him $3,000, not the other way around. Webb's face went dark as a thundercloud. Those papers are forgeries. Then you won't mind if I show them to the territorial judge when he comes through next month. Clara's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. Or maybe I'll just post them on the church bulletin board. Let the whole town know what kind of man you really are. For a moment, violence hung in the air like heat lightning. Webb's hand moved toward his gun, and Clara's fingers tightened on the derringer hidden in her apron. Then Webb laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You're bluffing. Am I? Clara stepped closer, close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath. You want to bet your reputation on it? Your business. Your freedom. The standoff stretched like a taut wire. Then Webb spat in the dust and swung back up onto his horse. This isn't over, girl. Yes, it is. Clara's voice followed him as he rode away. It's been over since the day you tried to steal what wasn't yours. As the hoofbeats faded, Clara sank onto the porch steps, the adrenaline leaving her shaky and weak. Thomas sat beside her, his arms sliding around her shoulders. The papers, he said quietly. Are they real? Clara leaned into his warmth, breathing in the scent of honest sweat and leather and home. Real enough to make Webb think twice about coming back. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, burning off the frost and warming the earth. The ranch spread around them like a promise, green pastures, clear water, mountains standing guard against the sky. I could still leave, Clara said eventually. Take that train. Start over where nobody knows my name. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were careful, chosen like stones for a foundation. You could, and I'd understand if you did. But I'd rather you stayed because you wanted to, not because I paid for the privilege or because you felt obligated. He turned to look at her, his gray eyes clear as mountain water. I'd rather court you proper-like. Take time to see if what's between us is real or just two wounded people clinging to each other in a storm. Clara felt something ease in her chest, a knot of tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. And if it's real, then maybe we'll have something worth keeping. Something chosen, not bought. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with lazy grace. In the distance, cattle moved across the pastures like brown and white clouds casting shadows on the earth. I never thanked you, Clara said, for what you did at the auction, for buying my freedom. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. Freedom's not something you can buy, Clara. It's something you take, something you choose every day. He smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, it reached his eyes. You chose it when you faced down Webb, when you stood your ground instead of running. Clara thought about that as they sat watching the morning unfold around them. Freedom. Choice. The difference between love freely given and love bought with sacrifice. Maybe Thomas was right. Maybe freedom wasn't about money or debt, or what other people thought you were worth. Maybe it was about standing on your own ground, speaking your own truth, and choosing your own path forward. The train ticket to San Francisco was still in Thomas's pocket. Tomorrow, or the day after, Clara would burn it in the fireplace and watch the ashes rise up the chimney like a prayer of gratitude. But not today. Today she would sit on the porch with a good man and watch the sun paint the mountains gold and feel what it was like to be truly free for the first time in her life. Even if that freedom had come at a price neither of them could have imagined when he'd first called out $500 at an auction that seemed like a lifetime ago.